Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I am the host of the program. And today, like many of the programs, we are going to be covering some very, very interesting topics. And the topic for today is Second Amendment, an absolute right to bear arms or not. There are many out there who are in defense of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution who say that you have an absolute right to bear any type of arm because that was guaranteed by the Constitution. Now, as a lawyer and a literal reader, I'm going to give you, not my interpretation, but I'm going to read for you what the Second Amendment does say. And the Second Amendment to the Constitution says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, when you try to interpret the Constitution, you try to look at the words, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to allow you to do that as I talk further with my guests. But one of the things that I want to talk about is what has been much in the news in the past, at least the past 5 to 6 years, is because we've experienced a rash of mass shootings. And just to get the statistical information, because I don't want one to say that I'm just implying this, but I went to the books to find out some facts so that I could convey them to you. And I began to look at mass shootings starting for really 1982 to 2019, but I'm going to look at some since 1999. And there have been 115 mass shootings in which 941 people were killed and 1,431 people were injured. Of those 115 attacks, 32 involved semi-automatic rifles. But those attacks accounted for 40% of all deaths and 69% of all injuries. That means the deaths and injuries were done in that percentage by semi-automatic rifles. Since 2017, 12 of the 31 mass shootings involved assault rifles, which caused 39% of the deaths and 92% of the injuries. Again, we're talking about assault rifles, semi-automatic rifles. In the most recent one, or very recent one, the Las Vegas massacre, which alone accounted for almost 40% of all the mass shooting injuries since 1999. The perpetrator of that shooting used over 20 assault rifles during the attack. Now, I want to give you the definition that we're going to be working with, and this is what's been used, is how you describe a mass shooting. And it's described as an attack in a public place where at least 4 people are killed with a gun. So you have the Constitution, you have some statistics about some of the mass shootings, and I'm just going to give you some numbers based upon a listing, not going all the way back to Sandy Hook, which I will mention because that wasn't the one where the majority of people were killed in a mass shooting, but it is the 4th of all of the number of persons killed from a mass shooting. The highest number was the one in Las Vegas, where the shooting from the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino, that 32nd floor shooting into that crowd of concert goers, 58 people were killed. That was on October 1st, 2017. The killing at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. It was a gay nightclub. 49 people were killed. That was in June of 2016. The Virginia Tech shooting in Blasburg, Virginia, April of 2007. The 32 people were killed. And last that I'll mention here, because there's a long list, is Sandy Hook Elementary School, which really brought this whole issue into perspective and into the public purview, while there have been mass shootings throughout the centuries, but particularly throughout the decades here and the years here in the United States. But the last one I'll mention will be Sandy Hook, which was in December of 2012, and that's where 27 persons were killed. I wanted to bring on the program a person who is knowledgeable about violence, knowledgeable about the subject we're discussing here today. He's not only a friend and a colleague, he is my fraternity brother and is well versed in the questions and the issues that we're going to be discussing today, violence and mass shooting. And that is only my dear and good friend, Leonard Lee. Leonard, welcome to Community Forum.
Thank you.
I want to give a little bit more of background so that our viewing audience is clear that I have someone here who has the background in order to at least have a conversation. You know, I don't want to say experts because we have information, we process information, we do that. But you come with a background and some positions that Mr. Lee has had. He's been a former deputy commissioner for the Connecticut Department of Public Health. He's a former state director of the Child and Youth Violence Prevention Unit for the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. He's a former director of the Division of Violence and Injury Prevention for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. He's a professional mediator, a recipient of numerous awards, has extensive community service, serving on many boards of directors. And as I said, he's my friend, fraternity brother, and is well-versed on the subject we are discussing today. So Leonard, I'm gonna let you bring it into context as well. You can pull out any of that background material, your present knowledge base, your readings. Put this whole subject matter into context.
Well, when you talk about the First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, and what's been going on, it's complicated, but it's very simple. When you read it and it says the right to bear arms, they didn't have armory that could wipe out an entire city. They didn't have things that were happening, and I think during the time when that came about, the forefathers were thinking it more as coming into a new country, leaving England, establishing some things new. So when I think about looking at the Second Amendment, I don't look at it as people define it today. I think there's a lot of different things that come into play in and around that. With the uptake of these mass shootings that have been deplorable, I think there's a lot of mental illness that's going along with that and the easy accessibility of getting guns.
What I want, okay, well, let's go back, let's step back into time. Let's go back to the Founding Fathers' time, and we talk about a time when, as you point out, coming from landing in a new world with families, primarily an agrarian society. Your neighbor, other than when they may have landed in Jamestown and later on as they moved into New York and all, but as they progressed going towards the west, you now have your closest neighbor maybe 5 miles. You had Native Americans and those things were happening. So would it be fair to say that the whole mindset was entirely different in the sense of providing protection? Like you said, there was no police force, there was nothing there. When it was basically self-preservation. Would that be your sense of what the thinking was around that amendment?
Yes, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, because as you said, during those times, it was a new frontier, and so therefore they wanted to be clear about folks being able to bear arms to protect themselves because systems were not in place. Whereas, having a law officials close by to respond to anyone who's being taken advantage of or being mishandled as the pioneers started to explore the countryside. So I think a lot of that thinking was in place, unlike today.
Well, You mentioned in your comments one which is near and dear to me, and my intentions today is to debunk that viewpoint. And you mentioned mental illness. Now, the statistics, and unfortunately I don't have the specific number here, and anyone can use statistics any way they want. But the reality is that the majority of these mass shootings that we're talking about, or will talk more about, have not been, folks suggest that the person may have mental illness, but it's never been determined that they do, is other factors that have come into play. We know that the age cohort of majority of these mass shooting killers is somewhere between 20 and about 25. We know that they're predominantly in terms of white males as well. We know that in terms of many of the mass shootings, they've been tied to extremist groups in terms of the white nationalists. So when they talk about mental illness, as and that's near and dear to me,
Yes.
that's a smaller number. I'm not going to say it is non-apparent, but it's a smaller number. Let's talk about that, because that's what the NRA and Donald Trump keep saying in response to mass shootings. Any information that you have in your experiences of having been involved in the whole violence and the violence prevention world?
Well, it's very interesting because this topic is highly political. They put spins on a lot of different things. And I think the combination of folks I think anyone who thinks, and this is my opinion, and on some of the readings I've read, anyone who thinks it's okay to kill someone or kill an abundance of people or children, I think there's something that's not connecting. And I'm not a medical expert, I'm just average Joe, where I just think of loving my neighbor and following the tenets that I believe in terms of showing unconditional love to people. But when I hear about these things, I say there's a disconnect. And the first thing I think about is having some challenges within their own lives, and they'll wind up taking that on others. But that
maybe
doesn't,
different from mental illness.
Yes, it could be, but it's like, how do you define it? Because if I'm talking to somebody from the NRA, they'll grab sound bites that's going to push their agenda forward. If I talk to somebody on the other side, they'll pull it in to fund their agenda. So you have to be careful when you use the word, but you got to understand that it's complicated, but it's simple, because we're not put on this planet to go around and destroy people's lives. So there is a disruptor in there somewhere for someone to think it's okay to sit in a window and just shoot and kill innocent people at will. I can't conceive it in my spirit that there's some justification as being normal of wiping out a school full of children. And so, and I'm putting this personally to me, Joe, in terms of my upbringing and how I feel about being human and looking at everyone else human and my love for people. There has to be something wrong. But above and beyond that, it's just also the easy accessibility of guns. That becomes the next thing that you talk about, because if you have someone who's dealing with some challenging things in their lives, and they have needed accessibility of something that could destroy a lot of lives very quickly, sometimes people take advantage of that.
Well, let me just push back for a minute, because I'm going to be the defender.
Oh, no, definitely.
And to debunk the notion about mental illness, I'm going to use some of the examples, the illustrations, which we have from the mass shooters. There were some of them, particularly the ones at the schools, Columbine, Stoneman, Parkland. These were persons who were disgruntled. It wasn't a matter, it was something, I don't know whether one may have been bullied in school, may not have been accepted in school, may have not been interactions with someone that they liked in terms of from a love interest, etc. Now, granted, the person who shot up at the Mandalay Bay Casino was, I think, 49 or at least older than that. I have the age here. It's that person was 64. So my sense is it's across the board, and I will give you, with some of those shootings, mental illness was present. But the other things that we found out is we've had them tied to white supremacy. We've had it tied to disgruntled because they lost their job or were fired. So, I mean, what you say is, what is the trigger which will make one feel, and as I said at the top of the program, it just didn't start in 2015.
No, not at all.
It goes back, and as I did my research, I got a list here. There's just too much information that I would have to put out here, but it goes back into the 60s. I mean, and if you talk about it, and I also read material from those who support the NRA's position, and they were saying things like, well, more people have died in airplane crashes, more people have died taking opiates, there's more shootings that take place in Chicago. But to me, that's missing the point.
Yes.
Is missing the point of the mass of the mass shootings. But I promised I was going to let you do the talking and not, but it's hard when you have this particular subject because it is an emotional.
It is.
It's an emotional point. Talk to me about, and I always like to do point counterpoint. Talk to me about the NRA's position, because as you said, you talk to one here, they have a view. You talk to one there, they have an opposite view. Talk to me about the NRA's position to the extent, I mean, if you can articulate that, or we can have a conversation around their view of this whole issue.
Well, there's an agenda here. It's a huge agenda, and the NRA, as you know, is being financed primarily by the gun industry, and so therefore, and remember, back in the day, you go back in the NRA, you saw a lot of people who looked like us who were part of the NRA. The NRA movement wasn't about what it is about today, in some of my research, and I'm not justifying any of their thoughts, past, present, or future. But what I am saying is that there's been a huge shift that's been generated around selling weapons and the easy accessibility of weapons. You made a comment a second ago in talking about the challenges and disgruntled folks and people being unhappy and being bullied and then having the opportunity to get back at people of the easy accessibility of guns. All this, and if you look at some of the research, all this really stems back to how do you sell a weapon and make a profit? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about profit. It's about Smith & Wesson in Springfield. It's about the other gun manufacturers in Connecticut. It's about how they are able to sell and push and support organizations like the NRA to sell weapons. And the easy accessibility of weapons, people will go for the quick one versus the long one. And when I say the quick one, I'm talking about when somebody's disgruntled, somebody's been bullied, instead of sitting down and mediating a situation, they say, well, I can get a Glock, I can get an AK-47, and I can wipe out everybody because everybody made me mad. And that's a lot of it that's been going on. And I'm not a mental health expert, but I think there's some mental challenges when people start to make those type of decisions.
Well, let's talk a little bit, and I'm going to jump around a bit because this is such an exciting topic, and I really want to play off in terms of exactly the subjects that, and as you lay them out. So we talk about, because we can talk about the gun, ban on guns situation. We can talk about the fact where there are certain states that have very permissive laws. We will talk later, and I will list them, that the countries that have permissive gun legislation. But if I go back to our founding fathers and the Second Amendment, and it says the right to bear, have a militia, and I would say when you read things literally, so militia, so that to me means Army, Navy, and police forces, and that's what they would mean in present day, in my mind.
Yeah, same here.
And the bearing of arms, or the right for the people to bear arms. Okay, you may be able to say that, but you want to have rules and regulations to do that from my vantage point, and we'll talk about that. But does it mean a semi-automatic or a assault rifle? Do you think that the Constitution had that in mind? First of all, they didn't even exist, and they had muskets and things of that nature. But can you make that leap, Leonard, in terms of just the thinking, okay, if we want to give one the right to bear arms, fine. Should there be any limits to that? The persons who are the strong pro-Second Amendment literal readers say it should be absolute. No question, no restrictions at all. What say you?
I say anything that was designed to kill an abundance of people or was designed for war should not be in a person's household. It's just like anything else in life. If it was designed to kill mass people in a conflict, a war conflict, that should not be easy accessible. It's easy to obtain by the average person, because it was designed for war. It was designed for trained military men and into an organized conflict. In terms of being able to get an AK-47 or any of these other automatic rifles and handguns, which are designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible.
It's not designed to wound.
No, they're not designed. They're designed to kill. But it also makes me think about during the time when the Constitution was written, that yes, they had small arms, muskets, things like that. But remember, things progressed. The Winchester rifle was considered the future, being able to, pump and have rapid fire. Rapid fire to them was having more than one bullet in, and you have to, take one bullet and put it in. It was, and it would injectable and come out. That was considered futuristic.
It took them from putting the powder in.
Yeah, putting the powder in, putting the thing down. And that was considered futuristic, but it was used to murder an abundance of people that had conflicts. And during that time, which was an atrocity, it was the Native Americans. It wasn't designed to go and kill an abundance of innocent bystanders. It was designed to eliminate a number of people in conflict, in serious conflict. So I look at that today, and I say to myself, why do we make this available to the common man? Not negating his ability or his opportunity to bear arms, but as anything else, having stipulations on how it's done and what type of weapon that you can have.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Let's go there. Let's go with the persons who want to do gun control, specifically, gun control, but assault rifle particularly. Mm-hmm. What are they asking for? And let's talk about the responses around that and why. Mm-hmm. So if you can list, to the extent that you are aware, what they're asking for with regards to the types of reforms that they would want to apply to gun control.
Well, they're basically saying there would be no limit, that you should have the right to purchase any type of gun possible.
But I'm talking about the persons who want to put in gun control reform.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, gun control reform.
And I think in terms of, it's like, and again, this is my opinion, it's like owning a vehicle. You have to learn how to drive it. Then there's a registration period, and then there's rules and regulations, and then there's a license that you have to require in order to drive that vehicle. As you know, that vehicle can be just as deadly as a weapon in terms of a gun. However, this vehicle that's 30 or 40,000 pounds, there's regulations on who and where it can be driven. And I'm saying the same thing when you talk to folks around this and they say, we're just looking for the same thing in terms of being able to know who, what, and where. Because just like a car, and I use the car as an analogy, just like a car, it has that capability, but we have systems in place. It doesn't deny anyone to drive, and this would be the same way with guns. It doesn't deny anyone to bear arms, but there's conditions of bearing those arms.
Now, if you had that similar type of system for this, and I read the arguments pro and con on the question of background checks, registration, age limitations, mental capacity limitations, criminal element, limitations, and I don't want to profess that I know all of the edicts by the National Rifle Association, but my sense is they've rejected all of those.
All of them.
They don't want any any
controls.
type. They don't want, from the standpoint of any checks on or curbing of any of the curbing of any of the rights of individuals. They don't want any curbing on the rights of the type of weapon that you may have. I suspect that one could go out and get a tank unless there's a prohibition against a tank. I think there might be because it messes up the street. I think that may be
Oh, no,
the
it
reason.
has wheels. It has wheels, so it's associated with a car. So you gotta, not the cannons that it has, but the wheels.
Yeah, or that it'll mess up the street. Possibly that'll be doing it. But I mean, we laugh about it, but quite frankly, it's not a joking matter when we've had these types of persons getting access to these weapons and creating mass shootings, not of persons who may have directly done something to them, but just from the standpoint of that they can.
Yes.
And so my sense is, why do you think there's this political debate? I mean, it seems simple to me that your analogy to the car should apply in this particular instance. Why do you think? And you're a political guy as I am.
It's real simple. At the end of the day, it's about dollars and cents. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And as you know, Joe, it's like the oil industry. You know how it's controlled and if they got reserves and not reserves. At the end of the day, it's like, how much money can we charge for gas? If it goes up, if it goes down, and they have regulations in and around that. But now you look at the gun industry and you say to yourself, there's only so many wars going on. So there's only so many guns that you can be selling for AK-47s that you can be selling. So therefore, if you have an open market, anyone can buy. So you make it exciting, you have gun shows, you sponsor this, you sponsor that. You're not pushing just a regular gun that shoots one bullet at a time. You're pushing almost like a fantasy of execution, that this thing could rip a whole wall in, and people get excited about that, being able to have that access. I don't know if you ever gone to a carnival or one of these amusement parks and they have these little guns.
With the water gun?
Water guns.
Yeah.
And you get excited about that balloon blowing up.
Yeah.
I mean, it rides on the same premise of that. I went through training to get my FID license, my Federal Identification Firearm License. I wasn't buying a gun, but I wanted to see what the process was. And I shot for the first time in my life, I shot several different types of weapons. And there's a sense of power that comes with shooting weapons. You shoot a semi-automatic, you shoot an automatic, you shoot something that's really rapid fire. There's an adrenaline rush that comes in. And that's from a 7-year-old kid to a 70-year-old man. And now you put that in front of them saying that they can have that in their house. It's almost like a toy in a way. It's a very lethal toy. But when I think about, because I think about this a lot, of why? Other countries, you don't see this, but it's all being generated because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Let me just, and again, you have more segues for me, in terms of how this program is being laid out, because recently, 2 major companies decided, particularly, I think it was after the, was it Parkland? The most,
Yeah.
or the Las Vegas. Las Vegas. One of the 2, Dick's Sporting and Walmart decided that they were not going to sell guns, ammunition, or anything. And in fact, the owner of Dick's destroyed about $5 million worth of weapons. Talk to me about, talk to me about that.
That was strictly a business decision. They had to look at their numbers because remember, as you said earlier in the program, you talked about other shootings that went on, and especially Sandy Hook, because that really got to us. Little children being murdered, and those companies didn't respond then. The pressure has gotten so deep for them. It's a business decision because they know they would lose money in all the other cost centers that they have. So I applaud it. But don't act like you did it because you thought it was a good thing. Because if you did, you would have done it when the peace happened in Connecticut.
And I think I think it was El Paso after El Paso when they may have done it. I don't have this. There's just so many here. And see, the other thing is we're quick to forget.
Yes.
And that's why I keep bringing up, I keep bringing it up because I had to go back and look. I didn't realize that Sandy Hook was 7 years ago.
I know.
Seems like yesterday.
It does.
I didn't, I'm looking at here, Stoneman Douglas High School. That was in 2018, 17 people killed. The Fort Hood, where the person in the military, 13 people were killed. Columbine, 99, 13 people killed. So, I mean, we rattle off names sometime, but I mean, I almost got something here of about 15 pages of shootings over the course of time that we've had, and we're still having the same debate, which says, and I don't think there's no political will on the part of folks in order to do that. And I'm not sure, I fault us as citizens of the United States as well as the politicians, because we're not pushing the agenda. I had and I don't have it right present at the moment, but I was doing some reading about what states are more receptive. And the number one state, I do remember this because I thought it was going to be Texas, is Arizona. And so I had to think back to what the Westerns that you and I watched back in the day. They were going to lost the Badlands of Arizona. So it almost says to me, okay, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And there was a listing of them. Most of them were in the Midwest and the South. I don't think any were in the Northeast. But what I'm saying is there is this perception. And as I started to look at things as well on this topic, and when you do research and you do it in a concentrated period of time, it gets to you and affects you in a entirely different way than this, sporadic and maybe episodic instances. Okay, Las Vegas occurred, Columbine happened, et cetera. It doesn't. Sandy Hook occurred. It happens for that moment. It's like a flash, and then it's gone. But when you start to read all this together, it has an effect. And a dear friend of mine wrote these poems, and I was reading her book, and I'm going to give her a shout out, and I asked for Roy to bring up the piece here, just a piece on her. This is a book called From Small to Tall. It's written by a friend of mine named Christina Trezevant McGriff. And the information will be brought up later on by Roy in order to show you where you can contact the author. But there was one poem that she had in there which I'm going to read here right now. And it says, Active Shooter, and is inspired by the Homeland Security Reference Guide. And it says, an active shooter will kill in a confined site. Victims are random, frightened, and take flight. The event is surprising and evolves extremely fast. We need to be prepared, be safe to last. Last dull and utterly horrible day, gun laws need adjusting, the people will say. You have three options. You pick the best. Run, hide, fight. This is not a test. Run, help others if victims are nearby in sight. Keep hands visible, avoid mistakes on your plight. If you have planned a safe getaway path, attempt it alone, don't delay, don't ask. Hide in an area outside the shooter's view. Leave no clues, leave no clues, leave no clues. Lock doors, access windows, silence your cell. The goal is to avoid any situation that tells. Fight. As a last resort, when in danger for your life, improvise your weapons. Be forceful and fight. Throw items, whatever needed to bring him down. Commit to your action and use anything around. So as I was preparing for this program and I was reading this book, I said, wow, that puts into perspective exactly what must be going on in the minds of persons who are experiencing this. And what I'd like to do is to show a video that was done recently about a school ad. And it was shown to me by the program director here, Jeffrey Pickett, and it's mesmerizing. So I'm going to let one form their own opinion. Roy, if you can bring up the video.
This year, my mom got me the perfect bag for back to school.
These colorful binders help me stay organized. These headphones are just what I need for studying.
These new sneakers are just what I needed for the new year.
This jacket is a real must-have.
My parents got me the skateboard I wanted. It's pretty cool.
These scissors really come in handy in art class. These colored pencils, too.
These new socks, they can be a real lifesaver.
And I finally got my own phone to stay in touch with my mom.
Every time I see that, it's moving. My eyes are tearing up now because I can just imagine my 9-year-old grandson in his school faced with that. You and I didn't have to face that. You know, you may get into a tussle on the schoolyard. You may be bumping somebody in the cafeteria. But we didn't have to think about going to school for something such as that. And you know, what's so chilling and so vivid about this is skateboard, scissor, pencil, sock, a phone. And when I saw that, it just stopped me in my tracks. So to me, that's what should be shown to any person who is going to be trying to make a decision as to what should be the right response with regards to this gun control legislation.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I mean, when I was watching that, I was tearing up. I mean, that our children has to even think about normal things in their lives now become survival tools in an environment which is supposed to bring about hope, learning, excitement, development, but yet the common things that you use to cut a piece of paper are now turned into weapons. The things you wear as socks to enjoy sports and your sneakers now turn into a tourniquet. Skateboard. I mean, if anyone who's watching that doesn't get it, I think they have some serious problems.
As you can see, I'm wiping away tears now because you have to harken back to your own personal your own personal experiences. And I just think about many schools do not have it even built into it any security. So it can happen right here where we're sitting in Stoughton.
Anytime.
All it takes is some disgruntled person, because a lot of those situations around the school are not necessarily persons disconnected to these individuals. They have some connection to the schools. They could be students or whatever that are there. How do schools protect themselves? How do communities protect themselves in these particular instances? And what this brought back so vividly, beside the emotional aspect, is how fragile and vulnerable we are. And again, I think your point is well taken that, you know, maybe that's what should be delivered to each of those persons who are there. But I also see the fallaciousness on the part of those persons that when it happens to close to home to them, they do it entirely 360.
Yeah.
And to do that. So the question is whether it's actually that they feel so much constitutionally correct, or it just hasn't come home or come close to me.
Well, you know, it's interesting that the way you frame that, because think about the shooting that happened at the high school down in Florida, which started the movement in the March on Washington with the young people. I took 4 busloads of young people down, and they were screaming. They were articulating the need for more regulations around the gun law, and that didn't even move people. Young people, hundreds of thousands of young people came and galvanized around that. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of not only the easy accessibility, but it being a $1 billion industry, where what is it going to take what is it going to take? You watching that clip, you would almost have to be dead not to feel for that.
That was around the Stoneman Douglas.
Yes.
That the young people really took the leadership. I can recall that they were on many of the major networks,
Yes.
and CNN and MSNBC, and talking about the issue and trying to spearhead that. And I really felt that there was some headway was going
I
to be
did
made.
too. I did too.
I can tell you, wow, the most recent shooting, even Donald Trump was saying, well, I might be able to get to the point of having background checks, et cetera. There hasn't been a peep about that
Nothing.
in the past couple of months.
Nothing.
So we get these reactions and then nothing, and it's that it's almost, again, using the car metaphor, you know, you're jerking along on the road, you're hitting the brake and, you know, on the gas, hitting the brake, you know, on the gas. And so I don't know what the answer is going to be, but we have sponsors here, Leonard. I'm going to give a chance for the sponsors to allow me to regroup and wipe these tears away, but
all
we'll
right.
be right back.
Hi, this is Roy Cohen. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen, located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. You can reach them by calling 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. You can volunteer by calling 1-800-ACS-6662 or online at www.cancer.org. Ilsa Mark's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market is located at 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. To get involved with Meals on Wheels, call Jessica at 781-344-8882, extension 2. The Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business in Stoughton. To advertise, call 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes here in Stoughton. You can see it on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., either on Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. If you have any comments or suggestions, contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, 41 West Street, 4th floor in Boston, Massachusetts, 02111, or call them at 617-536-2460. The 24-hour helplines, 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. Samaritans, 800-252-TEEN or 800-252-8336, or online www.samaritans.hope.org.
My guest today is Leonard Lee. He is a person who is knowledgeable on the issues of violence generally, and our conversation today is about the Second Amendment and the issue of whether assault rifles and guns should be banned or should there be some reforms. And that has been our discussion today, and I'm glad to have Leonard here with me to have that discussion.
Glad to be here.
From Small to Tall by Christina Tresvant McGriff. That was the poem that I read, Active Shooter. She has a book of 97 poems, and I invite you to contact her to see if you would want to purchase her book of poems, From Small to Tall, which really talks about from going from a child to an adulthood on many different issues. You can contact From Small to Tall 65@gmail.com. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is Leonard Lee, and we're talking about a subject which is much in the news, the Second Amendment and whether there's an absolute right to bear arms or not. And we've talked about the many mass shootings that have taken place over many, many decades, but we focused upon those that have taken place since Sandy Hook, because that's really the one that brought it into the public purview in a very, very demonstrative way. And since that time, we've had many shootings. But I also wanted to, before Leonard and I continue our conversation, is to just give some more facts. Because I started to, when I got into the subject matter, it came, you know, Leonard, I just couldn't put the subject matter down. I was constantly trying to find more and more information, and I said, well, you can't do all of it in the knowledge program, so I had to sift some things out. It's almost like baking, you know, I had to make sure I put it through the sifter and try to get the most salient information. But what I read was, you know, the U.S. population represents 5% of the world population, but 33% or more of the mass shootings. We are amongst the countries who have permissive gun legislation or gun laws. And I just want to list the distinguished group of countries that we're among. Austria, Azerbaijan, Chad, Republic of Congo, Honduras, Micronesia, Namibia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Senegal, Switzerland, Tanzania, Yemen, Zambia, and there are a few others, Canada and the Czech Republic, that have it as well. But that's the distinguished countries among which we are that have permissive gun laws. And, you know, you can take then, as you can see, very few European countries have permissive gun laws. Very few African countries have permissive gun laws. So the question is, why do we here in the United States, and it seems like one is going back and relying upon what one interprets the Second Amendment in order to say. So that's just the statistics. And what I try to do on this program, Leonard, is to keep folks facts. It's not according to Joseph Feaster. I'm not an expert. What I do know how to do is to do research, and I know that there's two sides to every story. As I mentioned earlier, you know, some of the persons who are pro-Second Amendment, strong supporters of that the Second Amendment has absolute ban, they'll say, oh, well, it's not the gun that kills, it's the person. Oh. And they talk about, well, there's crime here and there's crime in the community and there's crime. We recognize all of that. But as you and I were talking about off air, we were saying, yeah, we know that crime exists. We know that crime exists in the community, and you were going to relate to me a personal experience that you observed.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. Before I share that with you, I just wanted to, it's real interesting that being a public health official, and I look at this situation as a public health issue, when there was tainted Tylenol, they didn't go to the person who bought the Tylenol. They went to first they went to the distributor, then they went to the manufacturer, and then they went to the person who supplied the different chemicals and stuff for the company to make a Tylenol. They didn't blame the person who purchased the Tylenol on the death of whoever. But they don't do that when it comes to a gun or shooting. They look at the person who shot the gun. They don't look at how they got the gun, if they were trained to use it or not. They don't look at any of that. They don't look at the victim. They look at the person who shot the gun. I find that very interesting, and I think if people look at it in that light, you'll see the gun industry start to change in terms of how they put things out there. But one of the things I wanted to share with you, and it has to do with people making decisions and the state of mind that a lot of young people are in these days, especially living in urban centers. I've been in this work for a very long time. I've worked with a lot of different youth groups and organizations. I had people come from around the world come to me and ask me, how do we stop the violence in our country? I've had people from England, from Russia, from the Philippines, from Costa Rica, from Brazil, come to this country to meet with me to talk about how they can prevent the young people from getting involved with violence and guns. And one interesting thing that came up is it really wasn't about the guns. It really was about having a caring adult in that young person's life. So because I've been dealing with a lot of this, one of the things I was trying to step back from being active as I was in the past, as I have been in the past 30, 35 years. But one day I came home from work early, about 5 o'clock, and I was sitting down getting ready to partake in my dinner, and I heard somebody out the window say, "Stop, put the gun down, put the gun down." And I live on a very quiet street in Boston, very quiet, the loudest thing you may hear is somebody washing their car. And I look out the window, I see a young man holding a gun, and I see 2 police officers on bikes. So I pushed the screen out of my window. Literally, I could see the whites of this kid's eyes. And it wasn't a bang, bang, shoot 'em up situation. It was a situation where they asked him to put down the gun. You could tell that the young person was scared. He had the gun to his side. And I could tell you it was a Glock. I couldn't tell you to make a model, but that's how close I was to him. And as the police screamed at him to put his gun down, I started to scream at him and asked him to put his gun down because you're going to get killed. The officers on the bikes got off their bikes, and they were walking down the street, and the young man was walking very slowly as we were screaming at him to put his gun down. He didn't put his gun down. He shot it twice. And the police did something I've never seen a police officer do. They did not shoot back. He shot into the ground. We continued to beg for this young man to put down his gun. And he didn't. He backed up again by my driveway. And I was screaming at him, "Put the gun down, please put the gun down, please put the gun down," thinking I would break up the momentum of the conversation between him and the officers. The officers did something I've never seen officers do again. They started to scream and just continue without shooting their weapons. He shot the gun again twice. Then I seen the officers do something I've never seen in my life. They shot him in the leg. The young man falls back holding the gun in his hand. And his hand went down. As it went down, they shot him once in the abdomen and once in the shoulder. The officers, myself, ran. One officer ran to the young man and they would say, "Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me." The young man passed away. Mm-hmm. And I could see the hopelessness in this young man's eyes.
I can see you still feel it now.
Yes, it was very traumatic to me in a lot of ways. But I could see the hopelessness. And I see that in a lot of different young people's eyes and people's eyes. And having that easy accessibility of guns becomes the problem or the catch-all to gain instant respect, if you're trying to get back at someone. I believe, and this is just my belief, Joe, that if that young man didn't have the opportunity to have easy accessibility to the gun, he would be alive today.
And I think that this is as we move towards the end of the program, and even not being there, but I can feel your pain and the emotion on that particular subject because I read about, I have not witnessed, a person dying in that manner, but I'm certainly aware of that occurring. And what we're really saying throughout this entire conversation is, why do we need guns?
Yes.
I mean, again, off air, we were talking about, you and I, you got a reputation on the street how well we can use our hands.
That's right. Remember the popsicle stick?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh in terms of that's how you gained a reputation. We called it in New York. We called it shanning. Yeah. That's when you would spar fists in terms of just playfully doing it. But if you had to get into a fight, the persons that had the reputation in the neighborhood was not the guys who, because even then some people had knives, or zip guns and things of that nature. But it was, oh no, little Saul, watch out, little Saul can handle himself with his hands. To me, you don't show me any bravado by being able to shoot somebody. It takes nothing. Right. It doesn't take any guts to shoot somebody. Right. It doesn't take any at all. And I think that as this conversation unfolds, and I know that you, from your work with both the Connecticut and the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health, of Public Health, you were deeply involved in this.
Totally. Yeah.
And because you were dealing with the violence and the preventive measures. Yeah. So you saw a lot that went on in the sense of not only this, domestic violence. You saw it all. Yeah. I mean, in those key positions that you had. And I think that while this may not be on topic to what we're talking about, the Second Amendment? In my contention, it is.
It is.
Because if you're talking about that guns are out there, folks are having it, and folks will say, well, the criminals have it, etc. I go back to a literal reading of the Constitution, militia.
Yeah.
If my attitude, I read the two together. If you're not in the militia, then you can bear arms if you're in the militia.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that you can bear arms just because, as that language which says that's a literal interpretation, but folks want to separate the two parts that are in there. Leonard, we're coming to the end of the program. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this subject matter. It is deep and involved. I know you and I continue to work in the community on these issues, and I look forward to continuing this work with you in the future.
Same here. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think it starts to keep it fresh, because we should never accept a shooting anywhere, if it's a mass shooting or if it's a shooting of any innocent people.
And I think on those words, have a blessed day.
Thank you.